Hello. I know it's been a while. I've been busy with college and writing and lots of different things. Yes, I got a haircut. We hit past 1,000 subscribers. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that this just happened. Like, I haven't even posted in a while, and one day I go to my channel and it's like, you have 1,000 subscribers. And I was like, what? If you're curious, I am not monetized yet because you have to have 4,000 watch hours for that. So if you want to help support my channel by getting me monetized, you can go rewatch all the videos, I guess. I don't know. I'm tired, brain no worky. Today, I wanted to come back at you. I have a few minutes and I wanted to film a video with how do you know if your book is publishable? This is a question that I feel like is very common in the indie writer community because it's very hard to tell if a story is just a nice story or something that you could publish and people would actually pay for. And I have 5 different things that I think you can do or look at to help you decide if it is publishable or not. So the first thing that you should do is let your book sit for a year and then revisit it. So this may sound really hard to do, but it's actually, if you're like me and you're always moving on to different projects and you are always finishing one story and doing something related to the next, it's not as impossible as you think to let your story sit for a year and revisit it. You'll obviously not want to do that immediately after you write it. You'll want to like read it or, you know, show it off to your family or whatever. But after a while, before you really go and like start working towards publishing it, try to let it sit for a year, or if not a year, at least 6 months, because you're just too close to the story when you've just written it, and letting it sit will help you get a better perspective and a better feel for the story, which will also come in handy for editing, regardless of whether you decide you want to publish it or not. So after you've let it sit for a year and you revisit it, I have 4 things that you can look at in the story itself to help you discern if it's publishable or not. And again, these are not hard and fast rules. These are more things that you can look at, and the more you get experienced in the field, the more you'll be able to get a gauge for how they should feel if a book is the kind of material that would do well as a published work. So the second thing that you want to do after you have let it sit for a year and then you revisit it is check to see if the character development is strong and logical. Make sure that your main character, your side characters, your villain, they all have arcs. Even if it is a corruption arc or a flat arc, every character should have an arc. In other words, even if your plan is for the character to not change, make sure that it's clear that that's intentional and make sure that that stays consistent throughout the story. You don't want to decide that you want to have your villain go through a redemption arc and then right before the end they say something that was more in line with how they would have talked in the first chapter. You want to make sure that it's consistent. Same thing as with your side characters, your heroes. You don't want to have your side characters start an arc and then halfway through the story they just disappear and you never see them again, unless you did that intentionally and it contributes something very important to the story. Again, it should all be consistent and purposeful. So check for character arcs, make sure that they're clear and logical, and then third, check to make sure that there's a clear goal. It's very difficult sometimes when writing stories where you're not doing like a quest sort of story like in Lord of the Rings, where there's not some clear physical goal you're trying to get, to figure out what the goal of the story is. Now there should be some sort of pressing external issue that the characters are facing for it to be the most engaging. However, sometimes that's more subtle than others. And because of that, you want to make sure that you have not only a clear physical goal, even if the physical goal is not as in your face as, oh, we need to destroy the ring, you need to also have a clear emotional goal and a clear need that the character needs to have fulfilled by the end, even if they don't know it. Abby Emmons has a great series of videos on working on your character's inner conflict and making sure that that drives them to do all the things that they do in a story. I'd highly recommend Abby Emmons' channel. She's been instrumental in helping me get to where I am in my writing. But that's one of the things that she talks about a lot, is that your character's inner conflict should drive everything that they do. So make sure that there's a clear goal, not just physically of what the characters need to get done, but also emotionally of the ground that they need to cover and the realizations that they need to have in order to best portray the theme of your story and the message your story is trying to get across. Number 4, Did you write with an audience in mind? Now, the reason I say this is because when you go to publish a book, you need to know who you're marketing to. And I think my problem one of my problems when I published my first book is that I was marketing to too broad of an audience. And I was thinking, oh, I'm going to market this book to all young women between the ages of 12 and, well, I was like, well, the moms of young women might buy it too, so maybe 12 to 45, because the young women from the ages of maybe like 12 to 22 would be reading it, and the women older than that might be getting it for their friends or their daughters. You need to be thinking, who is the reader of your story most of the time going to be? For me, the target audience I discovered of my book needed to be more specific, and I needed to narrow it down. I have to revisit it because I'm republishing my first book at some point. I don't know when, because that's a long story, and I hope to have vlogs coming out at some point. It's just that tech has been weird, and it's been hard to get the videos from my phone onto my computer so then I can edit the vlog, but anyway, that's beside the point. I'm guessing it'll be that I decide my first book is for girls between the ages of 12 and 17, which is much more specific and changes drastically how I market it and also where I will go about marketing it. I will probably, at some point, if I want to pursue this aspect of my career, need to go to book conventions and book signings and those types of things, because conservative Christian girls between the ages of 12 and 17, since that's probably what my audience would be, are not as likely to be online and looking in the places where you would normally market and advertise your book. So that changes where I market it, which can change the publishability, not necessarily in the sense of, is it publishable, but if it's publishable, where are you going to need to go to market it and sell it for it to be successful? So that's a very important thing to think about before you start the publishing process or decide if a book's ready. Make sure that you have a specific target audience in mind and make sure it fits with that target audience. Make sure your target audience isn't too specific. It's good to have niches. For example, mine is generally conservative Christian young women between the ages of 12 and 17, or hopefully down the road I'll also write some more young adult, like maybe kind of 17 to 25, but that's still very specific. It's not crazy specific though. It's a reasonable range and niche of an audience. Now, if your audience was more specific than that, maybe your book would be publishable, but it wouldn't have a very large audience, so it might not be profitable, which is something to think about. Maybe that doesn't matter to you, but if it does, that is definitely something to think about, because in order for self-publishing to be sustainable, unfortunately, we do have to think about the financial aspect of it. So it's important to consider who your audience is, and if the way that you've presented the book, formatted the book, even how you've written the book doesn't fit with what you have decided the audience is going to be, you may need to make some adjustments there before you start looking into getting it published. So the last one I have is make sure that you've done sufficient research. I say this as someone who struggled with research a lot at first, because in my early days of writing, I did not really have access to the internet, and I had a very hard time getting information on certain, for me it was historical aspects. When I went to write fantasy, that kind of, I discovered that you actually have to do a lot of research for fantasy as well, because you have to be aware of the genre you're writing in. You have to be somewhat aware of how things would work in the physical world, even with like the fantasy elements. For example, some people are going to be like, how are you wielding a gigantic sword if you don't have training for that? Things that you just want to have bared in mind. You want to have bared in mind. You want to bear it in mind. And other things like, if you're writing a fantasy story that is in a world inspired by King Arthur, it might be jarring if you just randomly have a character with a katana. Just things like that. If you're writing historical fiction, of course, the research is something that you'll have incorporated into the actual writing process, but it is still good to double check if you have uncertainties about certain aspects and make changes accordingly before you decide to publish the book. Basically, if you go through all these things and you realize all of these things, you haven't let it sit, or if you have let it sit and then you look at these things and the character development isn't engaging, it's not consistent, there's not a clear goal, you didn't write with an audience in mind and there's a lot of research that needs to be done, it probably means you need to go back and do a lot of work and not try to move forward with publishing that right now. However, that doesn't mean it can't still be publishable in the future. So these are based on my own experience with my first book. My first book had some of these things right, but there were a few things of these things that weren't quite ready yet. And because of that, I am going to re-release it at some point. I keep thinking I know, and then God has other plans. But because I want it to be the best it can be, and I've learned a lot. It's normal in the self-publishing world for your first book to be something that you later look back on and you're like, oh, I should not have done that, or I should not have done that. I don't regret publishing it. I did it first because I was embarrassed, because I was like, it's not perfect, it's not as good as it could be, but at least it's out there. And now I know these things, so I can not only apply them to my future books, like my second book that I published, Taking Flight. I had learned these things, so I was able to not only be aware of them, but also I knew that I needed other people to look over my work to help me catch these types of things. So I've learned and I've gotten better about it. But another thing is that I can now share these things with you, so that then you can avoid making the same mistakes I did, because there are a lot of things in self-publishing that you just can't find out unless you do it yourself, or someone who's done it tells you not to do it. There's not a lot of other ways to know kind of the ropes, because a lot of it is very, not ambiguous, but it's not an exact science, and a lot of it comes from experience. So I hope these things are helpful. If you have a story that you're wanting to get published, but you're not really sure if it's something that you can publish, you don't know how to tell if it's ready, or if it's even a story that people would want to read outside of your friends and family, these things can help you determine that. So I hope this has been helpful, and I will try not to disappear for so long again, but I can't make any promises because college is college, and I am on the speech and debate team this year. So I am very busy. I hope that you found this video helpful regardless, and thank you for being here. Thank you for 1,000 subscribers, and I will see you in the next video. Happy writing and happy fall.